Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney. Today's review is going to be on some cookie statements offered by this organization. So this is their cookie policy. First of all, let's deal with the consent management process because I think it's valuable to look at that. And one of the things that I personally do is I take a look at what the consent flow is. When we're looking at cookies constitute personal data because they are pieces of information that can identify an individual, meaning my name's Funmi and I'm on this site. The cookies that are on my laptop and are utilized by this organization to improve their site, they're able to identify, maybe they don't know my name, but they're able to identify a specific individual because they gather information through the use of these cookies. And as such, there are responsibilities for organizations when they use cookies in this manner and are able to identify individuals in this manner, which is why on sites now, and actually I'm beginning to see that this is more common. If you watched any of my videos, you'll know that we do a review of the consent management process flow. But I keep mentioning the word consent because in order to process personal data, which we've identified cookies are, in order to complete that, you have to rely on something called a legal basis as a business. Now, there's lots of different legal bases. There is consent, there's legitimate interest, contractual necessity, etc. It depends on your geography, the legal basis you want to rely on in order to process personal data, which we've identified cookies are. So in order to do that, we can see here that what this particular organization is relying on is consent, because what they're saying is the minute I landed on their page, and that's why I always put the URL in, because this is the first time that I'm going on this particular organization's site. So in order for them to utilize the cookies for these reasons that they've outlined, they need to obtain my consent. Now, I have three options. I can accept every single cookie they have for these purposes, necessary for the website, optional to help personalize, advertising, analytics. I can decline all of them except those that are necessary. Some of these are on all the time. Or I can manage my preference, which is why I had mentioned the consent management process workflow. So usually when I do these reviews, I decline all, but for the purposes of this review, since this is related to a cookie policy, we're going to manage our cookies. Now, take note of this because on this channel, we do lots of reviews of different consent management flows. When I clicked on manage my settings, I was presented with necessary, analytics, advertising, and functionality. And you can see that all of these have been toggled on, except the one that's necessary. These are always active. You can't do anything about these. But you can see that all of these were toggled on. That's very important. And make no mistake that each of these actions is intentional by an organization, because I am accessing the site from the United States. And I'm actually planning to do a couple of these videos where I have my VPN turned on, so you can see how the consent management is different geography to geography, because that matters as well. Now, I mentioned the United States because it's likely that there's insights on the back end that this organization realizes that this particular user, meaning me, is accessing the site from the United States. And as such, the business's obligation is to provide me the opportunity to opt out, which I just did, right? If we were accessing this site in the European Union, the obligations that a business has is to provide individuals the opportunity to opt in. So this would probably not be toggled on like it is right now if we were accessing the site in the European Union, because the privacy obligations are different. So I actually turn all of these off, but I wanted you to see, first of all, we're presented with that banner. That banner talked about, I'm presuming, the same amount of information. And something that I've been seeing consistently during these reviews is sometimes the banner language does not reflect the preference center language. So these need to be consistent. There's three things that need to be consistent. One, that banner. Two, this information in the preference center. And three, the cookie policy that we're going to review. So now we're going to save our settings, but another thing I want to call out for this particular preference center is you can see each of these buttons is the same color. That's really, really important. Orange with white writing, orange with white writing, orange with white writing. It's really important for businesses to recognize the fact that you need to make sure that you're not influencing the decision that's made by a consumer when you present your preference center. So let's save the settings and let's go into policy itself. This policy explains how this organization uses cookies. It explains what these technologies are and why they use them, etc. Now, I think this is really valuable to highlight here. There is a disclaimer that addresses when this policy doesn't apply. I've talked in, I'm pretty sure, every single review, the importance of outlining scope. You really need to identify who your audience is for a public-facing document, and then who your audience is not. If you have a separate website, let's say, for example, and I've actually done reviews in other geographies, but essentially, if you have a website that you operate in, let's just say, Poland, and then you also have a website that you operate in the United States, you need to make sure that whatever cookie notice or policy that's being presented addresses the audience intended. How are cookies used on the website in Poland? How are cookies used on the website in the United States? And identify that in the policy. And that's why it's really important to articulate and understand what cookies are on which site, because you cannot just copy and paste one cookie policy if the cookies that are being utilized from site to site are different. And that's why I've highlighted this sentence, because this particular policy doesn't apply to websites our customers host on Hubspot or to this Hubspot tracking code. That's what they're trying to articulate here. Let's talk about the definitions. So a cookie is a small text file. I think it's really valuable when there are public facing documents for organizations to present explanation and definition because of, again, the audience. And in some geographies, it's really important from a regulator perspective for organizations to be very articulate about who the audience is and make sure that the audience can actually understand what your privacy practices are. So the traditional audience for this are going to be people that obtain the products and solutions by this organization. The audience is not going to be a group of privacy lawyers, so the language in the document needs to reflect that. I want to talk a little bit about this section, how we use the cookies. Now, we had already looked at the banner and we'd already looked at the preference center. One thing that I do when I conduct my reviews is I look to make sure that the language that's articulated about what constitutes an essential website cookie, functionality cookie, analytic cookie, or advertising cookie is consistent with what's displayed in the banner that we saw above here at the beginning of this review, and then also the preference center. All of that matters from a transparency perspective, which is a very important privacy principle when it comes to data protection obligations and responsibilities. So you see this button here, your privacy choices. One of the most important components of consent is the ability to withdraw consent as easy as it was to give the consent. So you know where we had the preference center and I was able to articulate that I wanted certain cookies to be turned off. I have the opportunity at the bottom of this web page to change my preferences, and it has to be just as easy for me to change my preferences as it was for me to give them. So I'm going to click it. Okay. Let's go back. Okay, here we go, manage cookies. So it looks like this organization actually has two different pages. They've got the cookie preference center, and then they also have opportunity to exercise privacy choices, which is different. Now, this review isn't about the privacy statement, and I'm pretty sure that there's discussion in the privacy statement about these privacy preferences. But just as easily as it was for me to toggle analytics to be off, I have the opportunity to turn them on and save my settings again. So I really hope you enjoyed this particular review. If you have any comments or questions about cookies in general, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another review.